Welcome everyone to the President's live briefing. We had about 170 people registered to join us today. I know a lot of you have been here before, but I want to just remind you of how we're going to proceed today. You may ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button. We'll prioritize questions in this forum that haven't been answered in previous briefings, but the President may have an opportunity to answer questions you have this afternoon after his presentation. I do have an additional request, which is that given the times that we're in, I want to ask you to remain respectful not only of our panelists, but also me as the moderator of your questions. Please do not create additional labor for me as the moderator by overpopulating the Q&A with your opinions. So with that, I'll turn it over to President Lemons.
Thank you, Yoshanda. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us again this afternoon. I'm pleased to have Vice President for Administration and Finance, Rene Rotolo, and Director of Public Safety, Fausto Ramirez, join me today for this briefing. So I want to start out with the budget because that's remained a very important item for us. And I just have some sort of general things, again, background that I want to give. And I have to start out with sort of a new mantra that we have, and that is uncertainty is our new certainty. And that's actually really the situation that we find ourselves in. There are so many unknowns about our budget situation and about other aspects of what's happening with Lehman College and Cuny and New York City and New York State, that I think are just getting comfortable living in a perpetual state of uncertainty and not knowing a lot of things that we wish that we did know. But that's just how it is. The budget director for New York State, way back in April, said that the state was going to have a revenue shortfall. He predicted then of about $13.3 billion and projected that that would lead to a cut in New York State agency budgets of around $10.6 billion total. We haven't heard anything since then. We expected to get word on April 30, then we expected more information in the middle of May. We haven't heard anything. So we don't have any new information, and yet we have continued to move ahead with our planning, despite these very large unknowns. And among those unknowns, of course, is what New York State's revenue will be, but it is also, in a very big way, what is the federal government going to do, finally, about another CARES Act or HEROES Act bill that would have funding for higher education and also have funding for states and municipalities. We don't know. I read this morning that Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin has now said that he's in favor of doing something, but that doesn't really tell us what. So it's really just ongoing uncertainty. So despite that, we are moving ahead. So I have a few slides that I wanted to show you to fill in a little bit that doesn't really remove the uncertainty, but I think is important in terms of what we're thinking about as we zero in on developing a budget for the coming year. So we'll see if we can get these slides up, and I can take you through a few things. The first slide is something that I have shown before, which is a timeline. And it doesn't have everything on this timeline. Some things I've taken off because those have passed. But for instance, if you follow down there to what is not yet passed, we will be putting a draft budget into Cuny first on June 15th. That's not a final budget. That is simply a draft budget that we've been developing and working very hard with all of the schools and the departments, different parts of the college to develop. The Cuny Board of Trustees will be presented with a budget and they will approve a budget on June 29. We really don't know what that budget is going to look like. We just don't have very much information at all about it. And the Cuny Board of Trustees also right now, and the Cuny Central Office is operating really with the same uncertainty that we are. And so not knowing what the state really is going to do about the budget, they will still have to approve some kind of a budget. That asterisk line that follows, New York State budget cut or correction, there's a date, June 30 is a date that the budget director may provide us with more information based on revenue targets, based on what the federal government has done, but we're not holding our breath. Based on what we have seen so far and the unlikelihood that the federal government would actually act by June 30 on any kind of new stimulus package, I won't be surprised if we don't learn anything there, and we'll be crossing that line out like we did the one there on April 30. So on July 1, our new fiscal year begins, and so we have to have our preliminary budget in Cuny first so that we can open the fiscal year. Usually they'll present a final budget for the fiscal year around August 15th, and we're still planning to do that. That could change given this has been such an unusual year, but that's the plan. And then again, on December 31st, the state budget director has the option of further adjusting the state budget. And of course, that will be after the November election. There will be some more certainty for sure at that point. We won't be surprised at all if we see adjustments at that time. So that is the timeline that we're on. And I think at the college, we've done a very good job of doing our work and trying to really be prepared given all the uncertainties that we faced. This is just a little background that I think it's really helpful to know as we move through that process. This just is a general, very, very broad view of what our expenditures are in a year. This is fiscal year 19. This is the year we're in right now. 20, sorry, this is the year we're in right now. And you can see that total salaries and fringe make up a large chunk of the expenditures that we have. Financial aid is very small. OTPS, other than personnel services, and energy and rentals that are in our budget but get paid by the central office are actually quite small. If we combine that a little more, it makes it even clearer the degree to which salary and fringe is really what our budget is about. It's 91% of all the expenditures have to do with that. So that makes, anytime that we have budget reductions, that makes it very difficult because it immediately, almost by necessity, has to involve people in some way. And that's what we really like to avoid. The source of the funds, I've showed this before, I can just go over this very quickly. Undergraduate resident and graduate resident tuition is shown here. These are actual payments that students make. And then if you tabulate that all up for resident and non-resident students, students out of pocket pay 20% of the overall funds that allow CUNY to function. So I want to end with this one because this slide is a little out of date. So the data on this have not been updated since last year. But this is what we were looking at last year, and the situation, the details are different in FY20, which we haven't closed out yet, so we don't really know the final numbers there on revenues or expenses, but this is what we were projecting, and the picture this shows, I think, is really important to keep in mind. The difference between that expense line and the revenue line, that is something, when it persists like that, is called a structural deficit. That means that we have something that is persisting in our budget year to year to year. That means revenues are not sufficient to cover expenses. And it means that over the long haul, we cannot stay in that situation. We have to correct that. We're very fortunate because we have a very healthy fund balance. That fund balance will be gone very quickly if we don't take care of that structural deficit. So that is part of what we had to deal with already, and this was before COVID-19 arrived and wreaked its havoc on the state budget. So this picture is different now because in some ways, particularly this year, we know that the revenue side of that is going to be not nearly as high as it was projected for the next fiscal year. But we have to realize that this is something that we were dealing with already. We're fortunate that we do have the cushion of a fund balance, but at the same time, it is something that we have to address along with the really immediacy of the budget issues that are created by the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's background on the budget. I wanted to say a little bit about the CARES Act. There have been a lot of questions about that, ongoing questions. And there are two parts. There's the direct aid to students, and there around Cuny, 190,000 students were determined to be eligible according to the guidelines set out by the U.S. Department of Education. That funding was allocated as much as possible about 2 weeks ago. The average was about $610 per student, but it was up to $900 depending on the circumstances of the student. The U.S. Department of Education, before the money was released, added this late requirement that students had to complete a FAFSA. And so that left about 45,000 of those 190,000 students out unless they completed a FAFSA. Subsequently, we found 11,000 of them actually had. And since then, greater than 2,000 students, more than 2,000 have filled it out. There's very little time left. There's until June 15th for students to complete a FAFSA who are eligible for those funds, so they receive those funds. And we really hope that as many students as possible will do that. And then there was a final ruling just recently that students who have a criminal record would also be able to receive the funds. So that was a really good, unusually welcome ruling that came out of the U.S. Department of Education. Then there's the other part, the CARES Act that comes to the campuses. And those funds have not been released yet. Cuny has developed a plan for those funds, but that plan has to be approved by the governor. And we are waiting for that approval. Half of the costs associated with that comes from those funds that come directly to campus are to be used for addressing the cost related to distance learning and other associated costs. Other costs that are also related to COVID-19 are to be covered by those funds. We have about a year to spend those funds, so that sounds great, except that we already know that those funds are really not going to be sufficient to cover all of the extra costs that we've had with COVID-19. So we're hoping that Congress will allocate more funding so that we really will have those costs covered, because they've been substantial. So as I said, we've submitted a plan to the state. And a question that's come up a lot is, are these funds going to help us close our budget gap? And the answer to that in a really simple way is these are one-time funds. They are not going to help us with our base budget over the long haul. So they're helpful if they cover the costs that we have encountered going through the COVID-19 pandemic, but they are not going to help us in the long term with our base budget. So I wanted to switch subjects a little bit here, but some questions have come in over the last few weeks about, and concerns that have been raised by faculty members and staff members mainly, but also students, about where are the sources of support for students, not just the financial ones that I've been mentioning, but sources of support that are addressing the more emotional, stress-related kinds of needs that students have had going through this. It's been a terrifically stressful time for everybody, particularly for students who have faced financial uncertainty, have struggled with distance learning and getting through the term. And so I wanted to put up some of the resources that we do have available. These are on our website, but also this presentation will also be posted along with the recording of today's session. So you'll be able to find these links if you go there. I think it's really important that students are able to find these and know that there are places to go for help. This is also being addressed by a larger group, a Cuny COVID-19 response task force, where there's also a subgroup of that I'm a part of, actually, that is working on further steps that we can take to address wellness and mental health issues. This is for students, but also for faculty and staff. So don't worry if you can't get these down right now. They will be accessible to you later.
Thank you, President Lemons.
Yoshanda had a few more things that I wanted to say. We'll move on in a second. But there are a couple other things I wanted to say before we move into the questions and with our panel. So what I wanted to address is something that I think is so front and center for all of us right now, and that is the response to the George Floyd killing, the demonstrations that have happened. And, you know, certainly these things are happening in the world outside of Lehman College, but we know that we have our own ways of addressing that within our community. You may recall that back in January 2020, I wrote an in-depth article that's on the website that looked at issues around equity and inclusion in the college, and it highlighted some of the initiatives that are underway and identified some things that we are doing, but also the need for ongoing conversation. I'm really pleased to say that some of the steps that were referred to in that article have gone forward, and there have been some real results that have come out of those. This week, the English department sent a letter to students and alumni which outlined the steps that they've taken during the spring term to address the concerns that were expressed by students in that department. I'd like to read just one paragraph out of that letter. We know it seems as if our English curriculum has nothing to do with people rising up in our 75 cities across the country and in solidarity protests all over the world, but it has everything to do with it. In January, the English department began the long overdue process of overhauling its curriculum by reflecting on what it means to teach within a Hispanic serving institution. Prompted by student activism, including a November 10, 2019 open letter circulated by the Latinx Student Alliance, we recognized the urgent need to redesign the curriculum with you, our Lehman students, in mind. And I have to say, by moving quickly and really lightning speed by academic standards, the English department has created a model for our other departments in the college to consider. This has been a lot of work, but it is critically important work. I also received a statement from the Latin American and Latino Studies department, part of which I'd also like to read. It says this: in the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies, we support all those who are marching in the streets in our city and around the world to demand an end to police brutality and address structural racism in our society. After all, our department was founded in 1969 because of protests. Protests by students led to the formation of the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department at Lehman, the first on the East Coast. We know that every major step toward justice in history has been achieved because of the courage of those who take to the streets in grief and rage to demand change. This is a very important letter, and it reminds us of the past steps that have been taken by Lehman College and by faculty members and staff members and departments at the college, and they point to what we must continue to do in the future. So we've already done a lot, but we have a lot of work to do on race, we know. I also wanted to add that there's unfinished work in other areas. The LGBTQ World Cafe that we had began a conversation that we also need to continue. June is Pride Month. It's a month to celebrate LGBTQ members of our communities. I want to finish this by saying a few things that I took from Sean Harper, who is the head of the USC Race and Equity Center. He does campus racial climate studies around the US, spends time on campuses with his teams, and they have number of findings that they find pretty much in common with all of the campuses that they visit. One of the things they say is that the least inclusive place on campus is the classroom. And that's why I'm really so thrilled by what the English department has done, because I think that says that is something that we're not ready to accept at Lehman College. But he also goes on to say that racial illiteracy is widespread and there's a lack of any curriculum on race. The issues that he highlights are that we don't really have data on the racial climate on our campuses. What are the experiences of students? Furthermore, we really don't have discussions about race. We have an unacknowledged racial tension among colleagues. We don't really have a way to remediate racial inequity among faculty and staff. And colleagues tend not to talk to each other about race and racism at institutions. He then very helpfully goes on to say, here's what equity requires. And I think this gives us some really important things to think about in terms of actions. First of all, denouncing white supremacy in its extremes, as well as in the curriculum. Talking about race and racism, strengthening racial literacy, becoming more highly skilled in matters of race, racializing the curriculum, taking strategic action, and aligning the demographics of our workforce with that of the student body. So these are all important steps to think about for Lehman College. As a campus, we really have to continue our work on race and racism and other aspects of equity and inclusion. We have to be sure our strategic plan reflects those values and is really clear about that. And one of the things that I have done as an initial step is begun to the process of putting together a presidential task force to look at these issues. I have already have a list of potential members for that task force. I hope by tomorrow to have begun to contact potential members for that task force, and hopefully can charge that task force within the next 2 weeks. And what I hope they will do is look at these things I've just mentioned and other ways that as a campus, we can be not only providing, I think, the important statements and the rhetoric around this issue, but actually taking the steps that we need to take. And some of those things additionally haven't mentioned we could do a climate survey of the campus. I think we probably really need to do that. But also, we've had important symposia in the past sponsored by the Center for Human Rights and Peace Studies, the Social Justice Lecture Series, and other ways that we highlight these issues and dig into them in depth. And there are other steps that we can take that we really begin, well, I shouldn't say begin, that's really wrong. It's really continue to take steps, but I think with a renewed urgency. So now, Yoshanda, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, President Lemons. There's some general reopening questions people have related to updates about teaching remotely in the fall. Are there any updates there?
So I'm going to have to come back to uncertainty as our new certainty around the fall. What I can tell you is that we are proceeding with plans for the fall that have most of our classes either hybrid, online, or online. And we still feel that that is the best way to prepare ourselves. There are some initiatives that are in the works, some of them from the central administration, to really greatly expand the training and preparation of faculty members for doing online teaching so that we can do everything we can to make the quality of those courses really good. So we don't know yet at all about coming onto campus and when that will be possible and to what degree that will be possible. We're waiting for, first of all, the governor, as New York City now works through its phases. We're in phase 4 of that. That probably won't come until August. But even then, it really will depend on what Cuny's guidelines are and then our own developing plan about how we have students and faculty and staff on campus in a way that is safe.
Thank you. There's a follow-up question. This one I think has been around for a couple of briefings now. The governor's statistics by zip code for the Bronx show that 50% of the residents in 10468 have tested positive. What does that situation pose for Lehman?
Well, I think that it's not only 10468, but if you look at the city's zip code map of a number of statistics around COVID-19, whether it's positive cases, whether it's hospitalizations, whether it's deaths, you can see the highlights on that map that are very, I'd say they cover probably a third to a half of the Bronx. So there are a number of zip codes in the Bronx that are very high in all those statistics. Whether 50% is the right number or not, I think one thing we have to keep in mind with all testing is that at this point it's still quite unreliable, particularly serological testing where the error rates are as high as 50%. They become more reliable, interestingly enough, the higher the incidence, the higher of positive individuals. So they're much more reliable in New York City than they are in a place where the incidence is still quite low of infectious individuals. So, but what does that mean for us? Well, what I think that means for us at Lehman College, and this actually probably makes us somewhat distinct from some of the other Cuny campuses, is that we have to be even more careful and thoughtful about the way we have persons coming to campus. Because, and this comes from the CDC's own statements and guidelines, that the greater amount of contact there is between individuals, the higher the risk of transmitting the virus. That's just a sort of quantitative reality. And so we know that as we have more and more individuals on campus, even with doing the screening that we plan to do and with all the safety measures that we plan to do, we will have individuals coming on campus, very likely, that are infectious. Remember that 35 to 40% of all individuals that carry the virus are asymptomatic. So they don't show up on thermal scans, they don't necessarily feel anything, and yet it's very likely, despite that erroneous statement from the WHO a few days ago, that these individuals are infectious. So it's very challenging, and the fact that the Bronx has such a high infectious rate means that there are more infected individuals around, but that rate of infection, even if it is 50%, which I doubt that is that high, but even if it is that high, that's not anywhere near to what we would have to be to have your herd immunity, and it wouldn't be relevant to our students and faculty and staff that come to the college from other areas.
Thank you. I think that your statement about uncertainty being the new certainty is probably going to apply to some of these questions, but I'm going to present them anyway because they've been posed. I'm an adjunct with a reappointment letter for the fall. So far, there are 11 students enrolled. With the budget problem, could I lose the course? And will June 30th be the date when I learn if I have a course for sure?
So take the last part of that question first. So far, the agreement with the PSC has been that June 30 would be the date when appointments and non-reappointment letters went out. And that is still the plan. We're planning on that. So far, there's no indication that date has been changed. So, for the second question, whether 11 students enrolled in a course will be sufficient for that course to run. There's not an absolute cutoff in numbers of students for any particular course. Some courses could possibly run with the lower number of students, but overall, I would say on average, we would not be able to run courses with 11 students or fewer. That would make it impossible for us to manage the budget that we're dealing with. And so on average, we have to have more than 11 students. We really have to have more than 20 students on average in a course. But again, this is going to go course by course. There may be courses, there'll be some exceptions, I'm sure, where there's a course, for instance, that is required for graduation. We don't have enough students for that course, and yet if we can't offer it, those students can't graduate. That's going to be another matter that there will be a lot of case-by-case decisions made. What we really have to do is we have to manage the overall budget to make sure that we have enough money to make it through the whole academic year.
You mentioned the CARES Act and you talked about a lot of different groups. Are graduate students getting any CARES Act funding?
Yes, they are. Graduate students are also eligible for that funding and they should be receiving it.
Great. There's another question about if enrollment revenue increases for Lehman College in the fall of 2020, how do those funds get allocated in the new fiscal year?
So that's a great question, and the person who's probably much better suited to answer that question is with us, Vice President Rotolo. But what before I bring her on to respond, if she wants to, what I would say is that we will probably not be able to give a really specific answer to a question like that until we know what our situation is at the end of the term on December 30, when the state budget director will probably make adjustments in our budget. So Vice President Rotolo, do you have more to say on that?
The one thing I would add is that if in fact we do track, and we will track it before we actually start the semester, if we do track enrollment growing, we'll be working very closely with both enrollment management and these schools and the provost's office to see if that growth is going to result in us needing to add additional classes or expand some offerings we're currently having. So this is going to be a watch and see and monitor and respond type of situation as we move forward. And I have to say, honestly, this is not anything different than we do every year. We watch enrollment, we watch the numbers, we watch to see what the students are enrolling in, and we look to see where we may need to add. So we'll allow ourselves to remain nimble in that response or in that respect. Great,
thank you.
Thank you, VP Rotolo. Actually, I have another question for you. This is on the topic of public safety. This is the question about what amount of our budget is security and public safety on campus. Are there plans to cut the public safety budget in light of the broader movement beyond Lehman to defund police?
So let me start first with what the current budget is. There's two aspects to the current budget. One is actual employed people who are on the payroll and the OTPS budget. And that represents roughly just under 2% of the college's overall budget. For the officers that are employed, for the office staff that's there, and for OTPS. There's just under another 1% of unfilled lines in public safety, and adding officers is a much more complicated process than hiring other people on the campus. You know, officers have to be identified or apply. They have to go through a training process. They have to go through the academy. They have to take go through a psychological evaluation. And to give you an example, for this last academy that happened, we started out with 5 officers. I think we actually, and Fausto can correct me if I'm wrong, we wound up with hiring actually 3 officers out of the 5 that started. Is that correct, Fausto?
Yeah, that is correct. The difficult part, if I can add, is that once an officer leaves, it actually takes maybe over a year to get a replacement. So yeah, it's very difficult.
We have a lot of 1/3 of our force is in vacancies. 2/3 are who are on campus, keeping the campus safe, keeping the campus secure, monitoring our open campus. And Fausto is going to talk to you much more about who the public safety officers are, what they do on campus, and what they do for the Lehman College community. And I would just add that it is not our intention to reduce our numbers of officers. I think we've reduced to about the minimum that we really should be, and we're probably below where we should be, especially when we're back on campus in full force. So if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to Fausto.
Okay. Thank you, Rene. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say just real quickly that to let you know that the campus is safe and secure. And honestly, we miss you guys. But let me begin about what the training and also the duties of a peace officer. And not only that, then I want to focus back on customer service, because I mean 80% of our responsibility is customer service. The 20% is the law aspects and law enforcement duties and things of that nature. The Cuny Public Safety Academy is a regional training facility that trains many different agencies around the greater New York area. The Academy is responsible for the initial 17 weeks of mandatory training before an officer is assigned to the college. The training covers all law enforcement issues, Cuny policies and procedures, and other topics. Some of the topics are sensitivity training, conflict resolution, customer service, which I mentioned, for them to become a peace officer. Their duties as a peace officer under the New York state law, they have the power of the arrest. The arrest means for misdemeanors, felonies, and they may enforce other statute local bylaws. These powers are limited to the geographical area of employment in which the peace officer is employed, such as the city, town, or college campus. When peace officers are outside their geographical area of employment, but still within the state of New York, their powers are reduced and they are only permitted to make felony arrests. We'll go back on customer service, because one of the things I strongly promote is to instill all our officers and staff a care where you work attitude to provide the highest quality of customer service to the Lehman community. I can't stress it enough. I always say this to my staff: courtesy is paramount. Our goals of customer service is to make anyone who enters and visit the campus and all the Lehman community feel positive about their contact with any members of the public safety department, to solve any members of the Lehman community problems, to provide them with needed information and resources, to gather the necessary information, to prioritize and evaluate and dispatch the necessary resources to any given situation. I can't say much, safe campus, safe community. Something that I'm so proud of, and we should all be proud of it too, is that Lehman has always been an open campus. And even though we are an open campus, Lehman remains one of the safest campuses in the Cuny system. Our annual security report, which is the ASR statistics numbers, shows that we have a safe campus. You can find the ASR on our Lehman website or on our public safety website. And it's true, because college communities are our partners in keeping Lehman safe. They do not see us as militant force. They see us as a member of the community charged with keeping everyone in our community safe. We have so much things in place to protect this campus. Public safety has over 136 cameras, 144 emergency call boxes in key areas on campus, and it monitors 24 hours, 7 days a week. We have card access controls on several areas on the campus, intrusion alarms that is also monitored 24/7. We have vehicle patrols, bike patrols, officers constantly patrolling the campus. We have a campus with a wide notification system to alert faculty and staff in case of any emergency. Public safety provides even escorts to students, faculty, and staff when requested. We have provided active shooter training, which is called ALICE, for the last 8 years to students, faculty, and staff on an annual basis. In addition, we have armed personnel. Myself, my assistants and sergeants are on campus and have been trained to respond to any active shooter event. We have taken a proactive approach on prevention to find and solve it before it escalates. In closing, I just want to say that, you know, we are here to serve, to protect, and to work with the college community to ensure Lehman remains a safe and secure campus for faculty and staff and students to work and learn, for the larger Bronx community to participate in and enjoy cultural, recreational, and educational events.
Thank you so much, Fausto. I appreciate that. Dr. Lemons, I wondered if you wanted to take this opportunity to address some of the questions that have been posed.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Yoshanda. I wanted to, there have been some good comments that have been posted, and one of them just informational from Stephen Castellano, but what he says is that he's added the Counseling Center link into the Lehman Blackboard course template. So that's great, which means that it'll be there for all classes, and that information will be, everybody will have access just automatically. So that's terrific. There was a question about whether we expect fall sports to be able to take place on the campus. And unfortunately, the answer to that is no, we don't. We don't know, of course, what the spring's going to look like. One of the things that I feel pretty confident about saying is that I don't think we will have gatherings on campus even through the spring. I think that unless there's some miracle in the offing, and we always, from time to time, we hear hints that there's going to be a vaccine in just unbelievably short period of time. I'm not that convinced that that's going to happen until we've really got a vaccine that gives us herd immunity. I don't think we're going to be having gatherings of any size on campus. That doesn't mean we couldn't have athletics at some point, because of course you're watching what's happening with professional teams and leagues. They're now going to go on with no audience, which doesn't really sound like that much fun, but anyway, it's a way for those sports to go on. But we definitely will not have that in the fall. There's another question which has to do with the CARES Act funding and who's eligible to that, particularly students who just graduated, the May 2020 graduates. They were eligible for CARES Act funding, and they were in the group of students that received checks or received direct deposits into their accounts, or who still have the ability, if they haven't completed that FAFSA, to do it. So those students, yes, are still eligible for the funding. After June 15th, they no longer will be. And of course, by that time, all of that funding will have been dispersed to students. If there's new funding that comes out, those students would be unlikely to be eligible, but who knows how that legislation might be written and how it might be then actually handed out according to the rules set up by the U.S. Department of Education. But at least, those students were eligible for this first round of funding. And here's a question I'd like to hand back to you, Vice President Rotolo. Can you say something about the janitorial staff, how they're doing? Have they been laid off?
Oh, no.
Them, and maybe you can give us an update. That would be good to hear.
So the janitorial staff have not been laid off. They've been working up until this week, split shifts, different shifts. We've had them on staggered shifts, but they've been on campus, keeping the campus clean. Although there's not a full amount, not everyone is on campus, there have been a lot of people on campus over the course of a week. And the custodial staff has been cleaning and disinfecting in all the areas where those people are going. What we've started doing this week in anticipation, and because the city has opened up as of June 8th, we've started to increase the numbers of custodial staff on campus. And we'll be continuing to increase the numbers of custodial staff on campus over the next week, and have them focus on all areas of the campus in preparation for what we think will become the next phase of occupying the campus, which actually is scheduled to begin a little sooner, I believe, with the research facilities, although we haven't gotten final dates yet. So they're all doing great. They're all well. They've all been giving the proper PPE to work safely, and they've been keeping the campus healthy and clean and disinfected.
And it's beautiful.
And it's beautiful. Well, the laborers have been on campus also. We have flowers, we have green grass. It really is, the campus is beautiful. It's sad though, because there's nobody on it. So you're used to seeing the activity amongst all the beauty, and all you see is the beauty. Although the animal activity has increased dramatically without the people there. So it's interesting.
Thank you. So there are a couple of financial aid questions, and I think that unless one of our panelists has an answer for this one, I don't have a specific answer for the question of what is the deadline to accept financial aid offers by students for the fall, but we can get the answer to that out. There's another question about, and this will come back to you, Vice President Rotolo, again, will projects to improve classrooms and other areas take place now that students are not on campus?
There have been a lot of things going on campus. Construction activities have not ended on campus. They actually were allowed back much earlier. So those projects have progressed along in the library, on the west side, on the east side of the music building, where the fuel tank project is being, fuel tank upgrade project is being implemented. We're actually working on the south side of the music building at the front of the building. The amphitheater work has continued on. But as far as actually renovating any of the campuses, nothing had been planned. I mean, the classrooms, nothing had been planned. And I'm not sure if you're talking about from a physical environment or if you're talking about the technology in the classroom. But no, those activities have not been going on since no one's been there. It's not to say that they won't start up once we get back, once more staff returns, when the governor allows us to.
Okay. It looks like there's a statement or question from a faculty and parent at Lehman who wants to know about HESC's statement about the COVID-19 financial aid impact. So I'm not sure that this is something that we can answer. It's text from the website, so.
Yeah, we probably can't directly answer that. Just to explain what that is, HSEC is it's another big part of the higher education funding that the state gives. State funds the universities, but it also funds HSEC to the tune of around $1 billion a year. And that part of that, a big part of that actually is, for instance, TAP, Tuition Assistance Program, is administered out of that program. And there's a fair, I think it's around 300 million or so of that HSEC funding comes to Cuny via that mechanism that's directly in support of students. But no, I think we'll have to see, we'll have to work on a specific response to that with probably someone from financial aid is going to be the best person to really respond to that.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that we've had in the chat. So I think I'll leave it to you if you have closing remarks.
Sure. Vice President Rotolo, is there anything that you wanted to comment on or add in, or Fausto, is there anything you would like to add in before we wrap up?
The only thing that I'd like to reinforce, President Lemons, that you've already said is that the uncertainty is the certainty that we have right now. And it's unfortunate, but it doesn't look as though we're going to know what our budget situation is for a while. So I'm very happy and I'm very thankful to everyone that we've been able to complete the planning and we have a good sense of where we are, and we're pretty close to where we wanted to be. So thank you all for all of your participation. And hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll hear something or know something so we can move on with planning and finalizing plans. Anyway, it's great to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Same here.
So I think we'll wrap. Looks like we're going to wrap up a little early. That's fine. And I think I want to just reinforce what Vice President Rotolo just said, because I know that this process for her office, for the budget director and all the folks in that office, and for all of the department chairs and the deans and the supervisors in various areas, this has been a hugely intense process. And I know there have been a lot of sleepless nights. I know there have been maybe no nights in some cases in the last week. And see, Vice President Rotolo is still smiling despite that. But I know it has been a huge effort. And I also know that we can't come out of this process feeling really happy, because we don't want to be involved in a process where we're having to look so hard to find ways that we can reduce our spending. But at the same time, I think we all have to have a sense that we are accomplishing something really significant. And Lehman College is in the really best position that you can imagine that it could be, given the circumstances that are swirling all around us and this huge uncertainty that we have. And it doesn't mean that we don't have difficult things yet that lie ahead of us. I'm sure we do. But I think that what I've observed is a lot of really good faith effort and good faith attempts to do everything that we can to stay true to our values. And, you know, very high among those values is to take care of our people. And so I think that that's what's been happening. And I think that no matter what happens in the next 2 weeks, as we finally get to a final CUNY board approved budget, or get to the middle of August when we really finalize our budget for the year, or December 30, when we will probably be revising that budget, I think we're going to manage that. I think we're going to be okay. I think maybe in some ways, maybe in a lot of ways, we've all learned a lot about this process that's good for us to know, and good for us to understand as we go forward. And we we'll always have decisions to make about how we allocate our resources, what's the best way to do that, how to really further the mission of the college. And so I think we've learned a lot in this process that's going to make us in the end better at doing that, and I think more effective. So I want to thank everybody, because I know there are probably a number of you that are on this session today that have been involved in that actively. So I want to thank you all very much. And just to look ahead a couple of weeks, we won't have an update briefing next week. We probably will have a briefing the week after. We'll announce that when we're certain of that, but likely will, just given the proximity to the CUNY board's action on the budget. And hopefully there will at least be some small smidgen less of uncertainty at that time. But as we've all learned, we will not count on it. So with that, I think we'll draw it to a close. And again, I want to thank everyone for being here with us today. Thank you for your questions, and keep them coming. We will keep collecting those questions, and we will try to get to them in future sessions. And thank you to Fausto. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here with us.
Take care, guys.